Well, welcome to the Institute of Managers and Leaders. I'm delighted to host today's webinar. I've got Shannon Cooper alongside me, and I'll introduce Shannon shortly, one of Australia's leading facilitators, and delighted he leads both our Foundations in Accelerate program here in Victoria. I'm also in IML's brand new digs here, 99 William Street, so delighted to get in here to a new facility and a new campus for our programs and our master classes. And of course to host webinars and have great facilitators like Shannon joining us. So thank you very much. And we just thought we'd have a little holding screen, which we had a couple of issues with early on. So I'm sorry about the bouncing around there, but I guess those quotes give you a little flavour of the impact these programs are having, our Foundations program in particular, which is what today's content is all about. So as you can see there, some pretty powerful testimonials from some of those participants who've gone through the program, and we're delighted that it's having that sort of impact on both people and organisations, and absolutely delighted that the content seems to be resonating with broad groups across society and broad organisations. So it's wonderful to do that. Now, Mate to Manager is today's webinar. And this follows our webinar series that we've been hosting fortnightly. We started only recently, built around our leadership programs. And next year you'll see 22 of these 22 of these webinars, all built around our Foundations program and our Accelerate program. So today's is Mate to Manager, which is a fantastic topic. It's a broad topic, Shannon, and it does bring to the fore a lot of challenges in workplaces where you know what you and I were talking about it. You're sitting around with colleagues complaining about management and complaining about certain things, and then all of a sudden you are a manager, and you sort of don't know whether you sit around and complain anymore because you're one of those people that can have an impact on changing it. So it's a really important topic, and it's to navigate it and navigate those relationships with the organisation is critical.
And it's often people's first step in the management, so that's challenging enough when you're a first-time manager, let alone when you're now managing your mates. So it's a double-edged sword. Yeah,
and of course we hear it. Recently I was in Wollongong and they said, Mate to Manager. Well, that's exactly what we need in Wollongong. Bring that topic to Wollongong, please. And so. We can give a taste of it today, and hopefully everyone gets a lot from the webinar. I know it looks really great. I should have done this introduction at the beginning, but my name's Sam Bell, and I'm the General Manager of Membership and Solution Sales here at the Institute. And like I said, Shannon Cooper is our Foundations facilitator. He's also our Accelerate facilitator. We probably should add that to your repertoire, Shannon. So just a little bit of housekeeping. The availability of all the material Shannon's going to talk about today, including the slides and some of the resources that he will recommend you go and look at, can be requested from us at info@managersandleaders.com.au. So just keep that email address handy. I will cover it off again at the end, but all the materials won't automatically be sent out to you. They will be emailed they will be available from us if you email us at that address. Q&A, we'll have a Q&A session at the end, so there's plenty of time for questions. So please feel free to send through anything as the session progresses, and we'll hit the ground running as Shannon finalises the presentation. Just a little bit about the structure. I did talk briefly about our program structure and how we work as an organisation and as a peak body for managers and leaders. Our mission as IML is to raise the number, standard and profile of professional managers and leaders. We do this totally built around our Chartered Manager Competency Framework. So these are the competencies we believe as managers and leaders you should aspire to grow and develop. And not everyone's got all the answers as a manager and a leader, but it certainly gives you this framework to develop your own skills. So if you look on the left-hand side there, the managed self competencies, they are the foundational skills, the foundations of management and leadership, to really learn how you manage yourself and have that self-awareness. And you develop that in our Foundations program. Moving up the chain a little bit to manage and lead others, which are those competencies on the right-hand side of the framework. Our Accelerate program is really focused around those competencies in particular. It does cross both boundaries a little bit, but moreover, it's looking at how you get the most out of other people around you. And that's where the Accelerate program really does focus, and support managers of managers as they move through the organisation to get more out of the people around them. So I just thought it was nice to frame today's discussion in what competencies we're looking at. And Mate to Manager, of course, does fit across both. It does buttress both in a way, but more so, it's probably covered more in our foundations program, Shannon.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that's does cross across both, but it's much more so in the foundations program. We dive into those deep issues and challenges that those type of leaders are having more so at the other level.
Okay, yeah. So that gives you a framework from where we're coming from. As I said, we're running 22 webinars next year. We've got 8 masterclasses across Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, in each of those locations. We've got a huge number of programs planned. So I might let you. It is going to be a big year, 2020, but we're finishing 2019 in the same way. So we've had 3 webinars in 3 weeks. So, but it's been fantastic, the response. We've got I think over 500 registrations to today, and so it's obviously resonating that these sorts of topics and these sorts of skills and competencies to develop for people. So I really hope you enjoyed today's content. I'll hand you over to Shannon to lead the discussion, and I'll come back in for the Q&A at the end.
No worries.
Thanks,
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Super excited to be here. It's as I said, my name is Shannon, and it's enormously proud to be facilitator with the Institute of Managers and Leaders, and in particular facilitating and leading the Foundations program, and as Sam said, the Accelerate program as well. And this topic is something that really resonates, and we know that around with the clients that we work with, in the participants that we have in the Foundations program, they often cite this as being one of the biggest challenges that they have. And a lot of the workshop conversations we have are centered around this whole idea of how do I go from being a mate to a manager, a buddy to a boss, if you like. And it's something that I can relate to on a very personal level, because it's something that I went through. And I reckon for many of you sitting there listening to our webinar at lunchtime today, you can probably relate to that as well. If you wherever you're at, if you're a very experienced manager, you can probably reflect back on the very first time that you were in charge. Chances are that you were in charge of people who were once your mates, people who you once worked alongside of. And perhaps you're a new leader or manager sitting on the webinar today, and it's something that is a lived experience for you right now. So with that in mind, I'd love it if you could just type into the chat box a number. I'm curious to get a bit of a take on who's who on the call today. So if you're a senior leader who's listening in today, because really what you want to get out of this webinar is some tools and some tricks to how to better support your team members, I'd love it if you could type number 1 into the chat box. If you're a new leader who's been in your role for less than 6 months, and perhaps you're going through this mate to manager experience at the moment, I'd love for you to type a number 2 into the chat box. Or perhaps you're a new leader who has been in your role for more than 6 months, and perhaps you've gone through this challenge or still kind of coming out at the challenge of being a mate to manager. I'd love it if you could type number 3 into the chat box. Or if you're something else and you're comfortable, if you're got a different role that's not one of those top ones, if you could just make a note into the chat box that highlights that, that'd be great as well. So I'll just give you a bit of a minute so that we can have a bit of a look at who's who in today's webinar. And if you're listening in Brisbane, I understand that it's extraordinarily hot. If you're listening in Sydney, I understand there's lots of smoke around. And if you're here in Melbourne, where Sam and I are today, it's about 19 and drizzling. So wherever you are today, there's a fair chance you're experiencing some different types of weather events. So some numbers coming in now. It looks like, yeah, it's good. We've got a really diverse group of folks listening in today, which is great. A lot of senior leaders, which I think is fantastic, that they're looking to support, and a mix of new leaders, been around for a while, and a few others as well. Fantastic, good stuff. Well, our goal today is to, I suppose, give each and every one of you some stuff to think about, and really what we want to do is give you some provocations, some ideas about how to think through some of the pitfalls of managing your friends and colleagues while still getting results. We want to talk about how to negotiate that tricky line between being a mate and manager whilst continuing to manage the performance of both individuals and teams and the business. And ultimately, towards the end of the webinar, I want to give you some ideas on how to develop an action plan to bring some of the strategies and ideas that we're going to look at today's webinar to take them right back to your workplace so that you get maximum value and some tactical things to do out of the investment of time that you're giving us today. So I want you to imagine, though, for a moment, right? I want you to imagine that you've just received a promotion, right? You're super ecstatic. You've made the step into management, and you're super excited because you're looking forward to being able to lead and manage your own team. You're going to have more responsibility, and you're going to have the opportunity to have a greater impact on the business where you work. You know, you're so excited, you can't wait to go into this leadership role. In fact, your ideas are already swirling around, and you're passionate about the change and the impact that you're going to be able to have. And then as you're kind of basking in this sort of excitement and this flurry of awesomeness that you feel, and the congratulations that you deserve for moving into this role, all of a sudden you have the realization that not everyone's as excited as you are. Not everyone is wonderfully exuberant and delighted about the promotion that you've just received, because some of these people might be your peers, and some of your peers might be excited for you. Hopefully, many of your friends and colleagues are excited for you, but I'm sure that there's going to be some that think they're more qualified than you to have this job. Perhaps some have been in the organisation longer than you. Perhaps some think that they would just make a better leader than you. So there might be a little bit of jealousy or a little bit of uneasiness about that transition. And people that you once thought were your colleagues, your friends, might not be as excited or supportive as you would have hoped. And there might be others who are your friends, and they're wondering, well, what's this going to look like now that you're my boss? Is it going to change? What's it going to be like for me? There might be others who are wondering, well, what changes are you going to start to be making? And they might be maybe not fearful, but certainly a little bit anxious about some of the things that you might do, as they would be with any leader or manager. And there might be others that are worried about the level of favoritism or bias, or, you know, we didn't get along when we were mates or when we were work colleagues. What's it going to be like now that I'm your boss? And all of these changes is if you're a new manager, you've experienced all of this, or perhaps if you've had a mate who has moved into a management role, you can certainly relate to this. You know, I love the old joke that I heard. And I've heard a few times now, but it's, you know, so it says, you know, a guy walks into a bar and he sits down and he's kind of sitting there with his drink, and the bartender notices he's a little bit sort of forlorn, and he says, mate, are you okay? And the guy looks up at him and says, oh, mate, I've just lost my best friend. And the bartender says, oh, geez, mate, you know, how did that happen? And he says, oh, I became his boss. And I reckon if you're a first-time leader or manager, you can probably relate to that a little bit. And for yourself too, you're super excited, but then the stark realization hits in that all of a sudden, these people that were your mates, now you've got to tell them what to do. You've got to manage their performance. Maybe you've even got to reprimand them. You know, as Sam said before, perhaps you've complained about the boss or leadership or management, you know, around the water cooler, but now you are in that position of leadership. So this is complex. This whole mate to manager stuff is really, really complex. And today, like I said, we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's get down to tin tacks a little bit and talk about, well, specifically what changes when we move from a mate to management type role. And I think that there are four things that change, and these are four things that we often talk about in our Foundations program. I think the first thing that changes, of course, is the relationships. And in this case, when you take the step up to management, of course, it's not just the relationships that you have with those people who were once your peers, but it's also the relationships that you have with people who were once your boss. Maybe they're now on the same level as you, or the relationship that you have with your new boss that you're now closer to. So there's a world of relationship stuff that has to change. And today we focus particularly on that mate to manager aspect, but in Foundations we talk about that broader relationship changes. And of course, expectations change, and you know, that full 360 degree as well. The expectations that you have on yourself, the expectations that your peers at the now management level have on you, the expectation that your boss has on you changes, and of course the expectation of the team that reports to you change. The required skills, again, and some of you on this call today who are having this lived experience at the moment, you know that there is a whole new skill set that you need to develop when you move into management, a whole new perspective that you need to have, and a whole new set of accountabilities that you need to work on. You know, delegation skills, conflict resolution skills, goal setting, coaching conversations, reporting skills, negotiation skills. There's a whole stack of new stuff that you have to learn. And I think the fourth thing that changes is, of course, your perspective of the organisation. When you're in a leadership role, things look very, very different. So again, this adds to this whole sort of level of complexity. And I think against this complexity and against these changes, one of the things that a first-time leader or manager or someone transitioning from buddy to boss needs to really stop and think about is their impact. And the impact that they can have on the organisation now that they've moved into a management role. And I love this metaphor. I want you to imagine, this picture here where we've got a boat in the water, and we can see behind the boat that there is a wake, that the boat leaves behind. And I think this is a great metaphor for leadership, because as a leader, you are like a boat, and just like this boat here, as it moves through the water, it has an impact on all of the water around it. Of course, it leaves a noticeable wake behind the boat, but it's actually displacing all of the water around it and having an impact on that. And I think that's the same as we are as a leader. We need to understand that the impact that we have is quite significant in all of those different areas where things change. And one of the things that we often talk about with first-time leaders and managers and so mate-to-manager type people going through that experience is that there are two sort of sides that you need to think about in terms of your impact or the wake that you are leaving behind. One is results, and the other one is relationships. And as a leader, you need to make decisions about how to best impact the relationships of the people that you work with so that we get great results from them, but we're also accountable for the results as well. And this is a fundamental shift for many people moving from mate to manager, because often when we're in the mate type role or down in the trenches, if you like, most of the stuff that we worry about is the relationship stuff, right? And now all of a sudden we have to also think about the results stuff, and the relationship stuff has changed as well. But I think, and I often talk about this with participants in the Foundations program, and even on the coaching calls that we have throughout that program, is thinking about these two dynamics and the impact that we have each and every day on the results of the business that we're leading and the relationships of the people that we're leading. And what we want to be able to do is make sure that we are doing just that, thinking about both. Right, thinking about both. We need to think about relationships and results, not relationships or results. And this is important, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on this in a moment, because a lot of people often move into a management role and they're all gung-ho, right? They're gung-ho, they want to fix everything. And what happens is that they focus too much on the results and they forget about the relationships. And of course, intuitively, we know that we can't get results without the relationships, but they forget, they kind of dismiss the relationships that they used to have and just focus on getting the results. Or on the flip side, they focus too much on the relationships and trying to appease everyone and please everyone and not make too many ripples, and they forget that part of the impact that they need to have is on results. So one of the key things, and all the pillars that we're going to look at today's webinar are geared around understanding that as a mate moving into a management role, things change. And fundamentally, the impact that you have has to change, and it has to change because we have to focus on relationships and results, not just one or the other. So let's have a look at some of the key steps, and I'm going to guide you through, I think, some of the key tactical things that you need to bear in mind as you move from mate to manager. And I think the first one is to be intentional. We talk a lot about intentional leadership and management here at the Institute, and we do that very deliberately because one of the central to our mission about creating better leaders and managers to create better businesses and a better society is that we think that leaders should show up to work each and every day with the intention to lead. And I think that as a first-time leader or manager, one of the things that you can do before you step foot in your place of work each and every day is to be intentional about understanding that your role in leading both results and relationships. Rather than just kind of, going by a bit of wing and a prayer, sort of hoping that things will work themselves out. It's by acting with intention. And we talk about often 6 layers of intentional leadership here at the IML. And some of the things that you might want to think about is, you're acting with intention if you go out of your way to listen to people. Are you intentionally going and having conversations with people, not to drive your authority home, but to listen to them, to listen to their concerns, to listen to their ideas, to listen to their thoughts, to listen to their feedback. The second thing that we often think about being intentional is, have you got a good, really important as you're making that transition, have you got a really good mentor? Have you got someone inside the organisation or outside of the organisation that you can reach out to with intention to have some conversations with? Another aspect about being intentional is thinking very carefully about self-awareness. One of the things that we do in the Foundations program is talk a lot about emotional intelligence. And one of the key aspects of emotional intelligence is being self-aware. Are you watching, aware of the interactions that you have? Are you aware of how you speak to people? Are you aware of that emotional weight that you have? Are you aware that when you have a conversation with someone, are you wearing the leadership hat or are you wearing the mate hat? So being intentional also includes being self-aware. Also, being intentional, I think, includes making time to think. An intentional leader creates the time and space to stop and reflect on the work that they've done, reflect on what they need to continue to work on, reflect on relationships, reflect on results. And I think that one of the things that you can do for yourself, or you should consider doing for yourself if you're in that situation, is to, if you haven't already, get your diary out and make some time each week to reflect on your leadership. In fact, as part of the Foundations program, we expect all of the participants to create 30 minutes per week to stop and think about their leadership. Also, make time to development. What are you doing to, we said that the skills are changed, so what are you doing to create the time and space to up your skill level? Have you got some professional development time or personal development time blocked out in your diary? Because that's what an intentional leader does. And ultimately, just get into the habit of reflecting. So ultimately, show up each day to lead with intention and listening, mentorship, thinking about self-awareness, making time to think, reflect, and putting time away in your diary to commit to development are some of the aspects of what an intentional leader does. One of some of the characteristics of accidental leaders, we've included in the resource pack an article that includes lots of stereotypes or archetypes of types of leaders that are kind of act by accident rather than intentional. And we'll send that article out to you if you request it. And you'll have a bit of a look at the contrast between an intentional leader and an accidental leader, and maybe even have a giggle at some of the archetypes that we share with you. The next key that I want to share with you is about being inclusive. And what I mean by this is that sometimes, and there's a self-awareness piece in here as well, sometimes what can happen when we move from a mate to manager is that we don't always include the people, or we have a bit of a bias towards the people that we didn't get along with. And part of your responsibility of moving into a new leadership role is that regardless of the relationships that you used to have, your role as a new leader means that you treat everyone equally. And that means that you need to get to know everyone equally. You need to give everyone a fair share of your time. You need to listen to everyone equally. Perception is important here. And there are going to be some people who think that as their boss, you're going to be their enemy because you were, maybe there was a bit of friction or a bit of conflict when you were colleagues. And part of your job as a leader is to demonstrate that you're inclusive, that now that you're the boss, in the past, that's what's happened. You might want to have an initial conversation about that, of course, but you should be mindful of the fact that part of your role is to be inclusive. And that also means that you might have to build some relationships with some new people as well. So just be really careful of the bias that you might have towards those people that were your clear friends, and understand that your job now is to be inclusive of all. Also, too, sometimes some of the people that you might be leading might not be your former peers. There might be some people that you haven't really worked with. So make sure that you're reaching out to those people as well, and work hard to build trust and confidence in those relationships. And it is interesting. I know, you know, in our foundations program, a lot of leaders have a bit of an aha moment because they realise unconsciously that they have had a bit of a bias towards those people that they were close with, and there was still that little level of animosity towards the people that they had conflict with, and they weren't being as inclusive as they could be. So one of the questions you might want to be asking yourself right now is, how inclusive are you being? Are you reaching out to all the people that you need to effectively lead them from a relationship and a results perspective? The next pillar I want to talk about is be clear. And what I mean here is that, don't forget, you can still be friends. You can still be friends with these people. You know, as I said, it's about relationships and results. But I think what you need to do is we need to be very clear to everyone that the relationship needs to change. The work relationship needs to change. As I said, you need to have some conversations with people where you're setting some clear goals and expectations about what that looks like. You know, so talk to your friends, these people who were your mates, talk to them. Be vulnerable if you like. Talk to them about the new responsibilities that you have. Maybe even talk to them about some of the concerns that you have. We talk a lot about vulnerability in the Foundations program, and I think having some good conversations with some people, just to call out maybe even some of the elephants in the room, can be really, really valuable. You know, explain to them that you're now accountable for them. You're accountable for helping them be the best that they can be. You want to be able to support them, but you're also accountable for having some of the tricky conversations if that needs to be had. You know, specify your goals. Be clear about what it is that you want to do and aspire to as a leader. I often tell a great story in our workshops about a fantastic leader that I had who came into the organisation, and in one of the very first meetings we had was all about him being very, very clear about who he was as a leader, how he wanted to help us, how he wanted to support us, and some of the things that he could expect. So again, if you're listening on the webinar at the moment, you might want to ask yourself, you know, have you had those conversations with people? Have you sat down with them and shared and called out the new, with a sense of clarity, the new dynamics of the relationship and what that looks like? Have you sat down with them and said, look, this is what I'm responsible for, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is how I want to help you, or this is your role in it, these are the goals, these are the expectations? Or are you kind of just leaving it to, you know, to some sort of accident that they'll cotton on to what it is that you're about? So I think, you know, sitting down and having that conversation is really important. Yeah, because a lot of leaders aren't. I think what happens is that, as I mentioned at the start, because of the change of relationships, there'll be a lot of people wondering, what is it that you're about? What are you going to be like as a boss? I knew what you were like as a buddy, but what are you going to be like as a boss? And what is it that you stand for? What is it that you want to change? What is it that you don't want to change? How's it, are you going to, we didn't get along, are you going to support me? So having those conversations that creates a sense of clarity is really, really important. And if you haven't had those conversations and you're a new leader today, again, it's something that I'd absolutely encourage you to do. And, you know, it's a great way to start the new year off as well, is having those clarity conversations. I'd also say be patient. I think a lot of leaders and managers fall into the trap of believing that they should start sort of managing their team and changing everything and putting their stamp on what it is from day one, from the get-go. Let's just get out there and change the world. Out with the old, in with the new. Now, and sometimes that's required. You know, sometimes the leader, that's your edict, that's your charge, that's what you're asked to do. But I think that, you know, so if there are any serious issues, absolutely we need to deal with those. But don't make the mistake of trying to boil the ocean overnight. Don't try to change everything, or, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that you need to honour the past when you're moving from mate to manager. You need to honour the past. You need to respect the successes that the team has had, but just be patient. Be patient with people. You know, be mindful and be self-aware of again, that wake, that boat, the impact that you are having. It doesn't, patience doesn't mean that we can we have to stop, but it just means that we have to use a level of empathy, a level of decorum, and a level of patience with people to allow them time to adjust to the new dynamic as well. And again, one of the articles that we share with you in the resource pack talks about some of those different archetypes of mate to managers and some of the mistakes that they make. And you'll see that there's a couple there where you've got these ones that sort of try to hustle through super fast, and the impact that has. You know, you've probably heard them. They say things like, "Oh, look, don't worry, I'm in charge now. We'll fix that by next week." And yeah, don't worry, you know, this I'll sort that out, or I'm going to fix this, or you know, you won't have to worry about that as of next quarter, etc., etc., etc. And I think sometimes when we set those expectations up out of haste, it can set us up for failure as well. So you've got to be patient with yourself and allow yourself the time and the space to develop into the new role as well. Be present. I think that's another a key skill as well. And what I mean by be present is make sure that, and this dovetails in with being intentional. I think you've got to make the time to have conversations with people. You know, if you're again going through the mate to manager experience at the moment, you know, have you made time to have one-on-ones with your people? Have you got regular team meetings locked into your diary, whether it be weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, whatever the frequency is? You know, have you made that time to just sit and have conversations and to listen to them? You know, even just short check-ins. You know, are you reaching out to your team members? Just those short check-ins to make sure that everything's okay. That type of stuff can absolutely pay dividends for someone going through that mate to manager role. You know, and I think one of the other things that we have to be mindful of is what being present looks like. And we've said this a few times today, because when you're in the mate role, being present might mean that we sit around on a Friday night and participate in having some drinks, and we complain about management, we complain about the organisation. You know, we just sweat the small stuff. But now being present means that we can't be talking about the problems. We have to actually step beyond the problems, and being present means that you need to be present and having conversations about the solutions rather than the problems. So that can be a bit tricky, because people are used to seeing, you know, your presence as a sounding board or an empathetic ear for the stuff that they're going through that might not be pleasant, whereas now your presence requires that we have a different style of conversation. So yeah, I think just start to think about that. So some of the questions that you might want to ask, because some of you might be saying, well, yeah, I could have one-on-ones with my people, or I could have team meetings, but what do I talk about? So yeah, some basic questions that many of our foundation alumni often find useful in these situations are questions like just asking, you know, what's going well right now? What's working for you right now? How can I support you as your leader, as your manager? You know, what areas of concern have you got that if I could fix those for you or solve those for you, how would they be better? You might even just ask them, you know, what are your expectations of me as a leader? You know, if you have those early one-on-ones, ask them, what are their expectations? What are you looking at from me? How can I be the best leader for you? You might even talk to them about, well, what are your goals? What are your objectives? What are your aspirations? One of the things that people moving from mate to manager, one of the mistakes that they make is they don't always have those types of conversations with people. And just listen to the feedback that they give you, and demonstrate your willingness to support them. So yeah, so ask yourself, you know, have you got those one-on-ones, those regular team meetings? Have you got that cadence of presence scheduled, and are you truncating those with those little text messages or telephone calls throughout the day to demonstrate that you are here to support them and that you want to be present as their leader? And the final key that I want to share with you on today's webinar, before we open up to a little bit of discussion and questions, is to be balanced. And I think we've sort of touched on this a little throughout the webinar today, but I think, you know, in the past, a lot of the conversations that you might have had have probably been skewed towards, you know, social aspects and our private life. And whilst it's good to sort of maintain that level of conversation, we now have to balance that out and move from the social to a little bit more of the professional type conversations. So we want to be friendly with people. We still want to be their mates, but the dynamic has changed a little bit. So just watch where that conversation kind of sits. And also, I think part of that balance and part of that shift of conversations from the sort of the social into the professional. We spoke about having self-awareness and having empathy and being present and so forth. I think one of the things that you need to be mindful of is that it's changed for you, and it's changed for them. And for some of them, they might be experiencing a bit of a loss because they feel like they've lost a mate because you're now the boss. The stuff that I used to be able to talk to you about, I'm not too sure that I can talk to you about that anymore. So they're also trying to find what this new balance looks like. So I think, yeah, things have changed, and removing yourself from some of those conversations and asking yourself, you're having that nice balance between the personal and the professional, the results versus the relationship is really important. And again, I know through coaching conversations that I have that there are a lot of mate to manager type people who are still struggling to find this balance. They get sucked into having social conversations, which makes it difficult for them to have the professional conversations, or they're having too many of the professional conversations, which makes it difficult for them to have the relationship building conversations. So just ask yourself, where's that sitting, that needle for you, and where does it need to move so you've got that nice balance that enables you to achieve results. So these sort of 6 keys, I think are really important for all of you on today's webinar, whether you're supporting a leader who's going through this transition or you're going through this transition at the moment. Just ask yourself some really simple questions and put together a bit of an action plan around these pillars. In fact, to help you put that action plan together, I think here's some really great items that you might want to put together on your action plan. So the first thing that I want you to think about is the transition conversations that you need to have. And this doesn't matter whether you've been in this situation for 2 weeks, 2 months, or even 6 months or beyond. Ask yourself, what are the transition conversations that you need to have? And who do you need to have them with? Who are those mates that you're now in charge of that you should have a bit of a conversation with, a clarity conversation with, an expectation conversation with? And what is the conversation that you need to have with them? Is it about the fact that we can't talk about that anymore? Or is it about clarifying expectations? Or is it a vulnerability conversation that you want to have with them? Maybe sharing some of the anxiety you have about having a performance conversation with them. And ultimately, to keep yourself accountable, when are you going to have that conversation? When are you going to have it? Are you going to have it this side of Christmas, the other side of Christmas? And stick it in your diary. Reach out to that person and say, hey, look, I want to catch up and have a bit of a conversation to you about what's happening at the moment, or I want to have a conversation with you about what my expectations are moving into 2020. So start to think, what are the conversations that you need to have? Or perhaps you've had some conversations, but there's been some conversations with some people that you've been putting off. And then the other thing that I would suggest that everyone on this webinar does today is just to create yourself a bit of a keep, stop, start plan. And that simply means asking yourself some questions is, where do you need to be more intentional? So are there areas in managing all these relationships and results where you are already intentional and you should keep being intentional? Are there areas where you actually need to sort of start being a little bit more intentional? What areas of your work do you need to be a little bit more inclusive? Perhaps there's some people, as I said, because of some yuckiness or some conflict issues that have occurred in the past, that you're avoiding having conversations with them, or you're not reaching out to them to have one-on-ones, or you're dismissing them in team meetings. So perhaps there's an opportunity for you to be more inclusive. Or perhaps you've got a bit of a bias towards the people that you know really well and aren't being as inclusive of the folks that you don't know really well. And where do you need to have greater clarity? What aspects of the work that you do you think that, I probably need to be clearer about my expectations? I need to be clearer about what my new role looks like. I need to be clearer about what those boundaries between a mate and a manager looks like, clearer about what we can talk about and clearer about what we can't talk about. Where do you need to be a little bit more patient? Perhaps you've got some mates who you expected more of. You wanted them to be more supportive, or you thought that they were going to advocate for a change, but they're just not coming on board a little bit. Perhaps you just need to be a little bit more patient with those folks. Or perhaps there's some people that just don't seem to be responding well to your leadership. So perhaps you need to be a little bit more patient. Or perhaps you need to have a clarity conversation or be a bit more inclusive with them, of course. Where do you need to have greater presence? Ask yourself, what does that cadence and that rhythm of catching up with people look like? You know, are there particular teams or particular individuals where you're more present? Are there particular locations where you're more present, shifts, whatever it might be? And is there an opportunity for you to be more present in other aspects and just listen a little bit more and act with intention in those moments? And are there areas where you need to have a little bit more balance? Is there an area where, yes, look, I'm present, yeah, I'm having good conversations with people, but those conversations are skewed a little bit more around the social and not enough around the professional? Or perhaps, you know, I've overcooked it a little bit. I'm having more professional conversations, and I need to get back and talking to people about what they did on the weekend and whether their footy team won, etc., etc. So ask yourself, where is it that you need to have more balance? And you can think about each of these questions from both a macro, like a team-based perspective, or even an individual perspective. But here's what I can assure you: if you ask yourselves these questions, you know, what conversations do you need to have? And you combine that with developing a bit of a keep, stop, start plan for yourself. One of the absolute truths is that transition from mate to manager will start to become a little bit easier. And it will become a little bit easier because you're fundamentally acting with intent. You're not just sort of relying on past relationships or relying on your skill or your knowledge or relying on just the authority that you have because you are now a manager. You're actually doing it with a level of rigor, a level of intention, and a level of focus that will make things a hell of a lot easier for you. So what we're going to do now for the last 15, 20 minutes or so, I'll invite Sam to come back in. Thanks, you, Shannon.
Thank you.
We'd love to.
Shannon. Well done.
Oh, thank you. There's always so much to get through.
There is.
In a short space of time.
We've got some time. We've probably got 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, perfect. Great. So we'd love to answer any questions that you've got about the stuff that we've covered today, or any questions you've got about any of our programs as well.
Yeah, there has been a big volume of questions.
Oh, good. So, they're already coming through.
Yeah. So we've, and one of the ones that stands out to me, they've been coming through, and I've been sitting over there listening to Shannon and seeing these questions come through. But one of the ones that stands to me, what about dealing with cross management?
Right.
For example, when you are at the same level as another leader,
yep,
and need to manage a role with them.
So I've now moved into, we're mates, you were a manager, and now, right.
Yeah. Now we're on the same level.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, on the face of it, this sounds really simplistic, but I reckon the truth is exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. Let's have that conversation. You know, we're now peers, so let's talk about, well, what is this going to look like for us now?
Yeah.
I might even, like I say, be vulnerable. It's like, look, I'm actually feeling a bit nervous or anxious about what this looks like. Yeah. Or it might be where we sit down and say, look, you know, we're now sort of sitting at the same big table next to each other.
Yeah.
Tell me, Sam, what are you looking for from me? What does it need to look like? And also be open and assertive and say, look, these are some of the things that I'm looking at from you. Yeah. And also just acknowledge that new dynamic. I think that the pillars that we looked at today absolutely apply in the same way. So just the context is different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you approach being the youngest on the team and being the manager?
Yeah.
So that's a really good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just how age comes into it.
Absolutely. It's something that's I can absolutely relate to. One of my very first experiences as a manager, I was about 22 at the time, was put in charge of a team. The next oldest to me was 45, and they went out to 55.
Wow.
And again, I think just acknowledge that. Because often there might be a little bit, in my case, and in a lot of cases where we have these conversations, there's professional jealousy. What can you don't have the experience that I have, so what can you tell me? Yeah. Or why should you be telling me when I've got all these stripes of years of tenure?
Yeah.
And I think you've got to honour that. I think shift your frame.
Lean on that experience.
Lean into it. Yeah. Like, what can you tell me? How can you help me? How can you accelerate my growth? But I also think in that case too, that sort of leader as a servant, your job is not to reinvent the wheel. Your challenge is to tap into all that knowledge and that wisdom and harness it, and work out how to do that. And I think again that the context of what we spoke about today, it's the same stuff. The context changes. Yeah,
someone's just sent a similar type thing. I've recently been appointed manager for a team, including a few people more experienced than senior.
Yeah.
So, you know, how do you initiate that discussion? It's sort of the similar principles
absolutely.
in having that conversation with them.
And even just as I know it can be problematic sometimes, or you can open up a bit of a can of worms. But one of the things that I've done, and many of my coaching clients, any participants in the Foundations program have done this as experiments.
Yeah.
They'll often just ask and say, well, if you were me, what would you do? Yeah. That's a fascinating question. Look, if you were me, what would you do? Or if you were me, what would be your 3 top priorities?
Yeah.
Or what are the top 3 things that I should do to make your, like, just empathy?
Yeah.
Because often these people with all the experience, whether it's an age thing or whether it's just, again, an experience or a tenure thing, ultimately what they want to do, we're all human, we all have an ego, they just want to be heard. They want to be acknowledged. They want their experience to know that it's not going to be dismissed and that it matters and that it counts. And if you can have a conversation from that place, rather than just saying, don't worry, I'm the new sheriff in town, it can be a game changer.
Be a lot better. And it goes to it does go to the point, you did mention accidental manager versus intentional leader. It does go to the point that so many accidental managers are appointed into roles because they're the best salesperson or they've been there the longest. But they don't have the skills and the competency framework we went through before, they don't have those skills to lead. So the organisation's made the right decision in choosing Shannon to lead the team because he's the best leader. He might not have been here the longest. And it's overcoming that. And they know you're the intentional leader and this person, it does not have those skills.
That's right. Yeah. You're there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right. The organisation's got your back, I would hope. The organisation's got your back. And it's like, so I think that's another key thing is, like I said, walking each day with intention. But that is easy when you know that the organisation has put me in this position because they believe I'm the best person to lead this team. And that should give you a level of confidence to sort of lean in to have some of these conversations. They're tricky, and the mechanics and the context is different, but the challenge is there for everyone on the webinar today.
Here's a good one, Shannon. Good. How and where do you draw the line with social media? So Facebook friends or Instagram friends?
Yeah.
I think we've stumped him.
No, I was going to say, I guess, look, it's personal preference. I think sometimes you've got to go with your gut. Again, I spoke about being balanced, right? Being balanced, and I think that if you can hold the mirror up to yourself and look in the mirror and say, yes, there is a perfect balance between the banter that I'm engaging in Facebook, or the stuff that I'm reading on Facebook and the interactions that I'm having on Facebook, and the professionalism. I'm happy with that balance. Good. But if you go, hang on, I'm getting caught into I'm reading some stuff that I don't like on Facebook, or I'm being provoked by some stuff that I'm reading on Facebook, or I'm engaging in some stuff that it doesn't really fit with me, I think back out. And that's discipline, right? That's discipline about how to manage those relationships. And that's part of leadership.
And I think that fine line is being walked every day.
Every day.
Particularly by organisations now, what is that line between social media, someone's personal versus their professional? The line is very, and as a manager, how much do you want to engage in
that? And I know, look, I have some people who say, you know what, I just, I take myself out of Facebook. We're still friends on Facebook, but
you just don't engage.
I don't engage. I don't respond. And then I've got others who are able to manage that quite well. So it really is an individual thing. But I reckon ultimately, Sam, the advice that I would give is don't kid yourself. Like if your gut tells you that as a leader, as a business, as an advocate, as someone who has the responsibility to move the business forward and portray a positive image, if it's not a conversation that you would have face to face, then it's probably not appropriate to have in social media.
Either. And that's typically the policy, isn't it? If you're not going to say it face to face, then. How do you build the trust to ask what they would do? Otherwise, I think you may cause a greater rift to overcome.
So I think we spoke about acting with clarity. There's a difference between asking people, okay, if you were me, what would you do? And having that conversation simply because you want to listen and you want to hear their concerns. It's a very different conversation to say, whatever you tell me, I am going to do. So it's about that expectation setting. So there's nothing wrong, I think, and I think it's enormously powerful in understanding what it is that your team expects of you, but also having that clarity conversation about what you can and can't do. Now, I get that you're not going to be able to do everything that everyone wants you to be able to do. as a result of that conversation. But the reality is, as a leader, you're never going to be able to satisfy all the people all the time.
Yeah.
But one thing that you should never stop doing is listening to people. But if you listen to people with genuine intention and care, and you listen to people to try to understand what it is that they want and why they will want, you can also be assertive enough in those cases to explain why you can't do what it is that they're asking you to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's a clarity conversation.
Yeah. Communicate. Communicate with clarity.
Absolutely. But never don't ask because you're worried about that. I think that it's better out there in the open because I know that's what you want me to do, and we can have a conversation rather than you kind of holding on to this stuff that kind of just sits there and builds up and builds up and builds up.
Yeah.
Because it's not there out there in the open. That's a bigger conflict to deal with rather than the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll create more of a rift.
Absolutely.
Over the longer term.
Over the longer term. Yeah.
I want to talk to, and this comes to that point a little bit. I want to talk to a subordinate about their personal life because we're good friends. But previously they have taken this back to the workplace and disregarded my position as their manager. How can I approach this and set the tone for our relationship, both professionally and personally?
Right. So I think I understand that. So it's like we have a bit of a chat about something, and then you come into work and talk about what we spoke about over a beer on Saturday afternoon. Yeah, that's a really good point. What happens when we are mates, when we say have a barbecue on a Sunday afternoon, and then something that's mentioned comes back to work and undermines my leadership. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think a conversation. It's a feedback conversation that we need to have with that person, just letting them know that this is what's happened and how you feel about that and the impact that it has, and then just realigning the expectations. Hey, look, we get along, socially, we catch up, and I enjoy that, and I want to continue doing that. And my expectations are that when we talk about certain things, that we kind of respect that protocol. But also I think as a leader, you need to be mindful because it might be a simple case of where, as unfortunate as it is, I can't have those conversations with that person anymore. That's the change of the relationship, and I spoke about the loss that some people have. That might be one of those things where it's like, I just can't have that conversation with you anymore, Sam. Yeah. Because you take it back to work on Monday. Yeah. And that's, again, there's sometimes have the conversation, and if it doesn't change, then change your behaviour.
Yeah. What do you do if your boss is friends with your family and your co-workers believe you got the job because of them? Nepotism.
Nepotism. What do you do? Well, it depends what if the dynamic is, or if it's problematic, like they can kind of think that, right? If they want to think that, they can think that. That's okay. It doesn't stop you from doing your job.
Does it undermine the authority though?
Yeah, well, that's the challenge. If they think that, but then it impacts their behaviour. In other words, they don't think that you're the right person for the job, and the only reason that you got the job. That's a different thing. And I think that's where patience matters. Patience and intention. Patience and intentions. Again, all of these things that we spoke about today absolutely matter. But ultimately, what you want to try to do, and this sounds a bit trite or a bit cliche, but ultimately what you want to do is prove to them that, no, because I'm the right person for the job. Yeah. And I didn't just get the job because of some sort of family connection. I'm absolutely the right person for the job, and I'm going to prove that to you. And I'm going to do that with intention. And I'm going to do that by being present. I'm going to do that by being inclusive. So after a while, what happens is that the proof that people have with you is that, oh, no, you're just the right person. It's a bit like the 80-20, right? The old sort of Pareto principle, where you're going to have some people who will support you just because you're the boss. You're going to have some people who are like, oh, I'm not too sure. I want to wait to sort of see how this works out. And you're going to have some people who are like, no, I want a solid bank of truth before I support you. And I think just sort of acknowledging that and like I say, being patient, not trying to solve all the issues too quickly.
I'm a CEO and my leadership team have become personal friends as well as professional. Is that healthy for a senior leadership team in an organisation?
Again, I really think it depends. I think that as a senior leadership team, if those relationships mean that we're not having the conversations that we need to have, that we're engaging in too much groupthink or social loafing, or we're not engaging in critical thought, or we're becoming a little bit sort of lazy and sloppy. And I think as whoever asked that question, as a CEO, if you're kind of noticing that, then
but
absolutely it's not healthy.
a bit of a club,
a bit of a clique, bit of a club. We've got each other's back.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll support you if you don't do it. Like some of that dysfunctions that kind of happen. But on the flip side, we all need friends at work. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, relationships and that sense of belonging. So on the flip side, having a good social construct at that level can be really healthy as well, because there is that high level of trust that can often mean that we can have those really robust conversations. We can hold each other to account to a much higher degree. So I think it's as the CEO, I don't necessarily think it's a problem until it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And if you're kind of looking at it going, hang on, this is what I'm seeing. We used to be able to have these conversations, or this used to happen, and it's not happening anymore. Our competitive edge has dropped off, or our engagement levels or customer loyalty has dropped off. It might.
But the CEO has to recognise that too.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. Yeah. And that's where they need to act with intention.
Yeah. And they've got to take that advice as well when it's potentially told to them by
by
others.
Yeah. And that happens a lot too. I know, having worked with a lot of organisations in regional locations, like in the healthcare sector or things like that, where boards, they in regional locations, their kids go to the same school, they play at the same football club, the same netball club, they shop in the same supermarket. So there's a social connection, and again, it can be really useful, but it can also become problematic if we stop holding ourselves to account and stop engaging in those things that are expected at that very senior level.
Okay. 2 final questions, and then because we've got a minute to go, so we're going to be really quick here. How do you put performance pressure on someone who was a friend and now you're managing them? Is it, obviously the similar principles. Is there any difference in terms of when they're underperforming and they're not?
No, I think we need to be careful. Sometimes I think it's exactly the same. I think be clear about what your expectations are. It doesn't matter whether you're a new manager or not. If you're clear about what the expectations are and there's a level of underperformance, then we should be able to have that conversation. The one caveat that I would add to that is sometimes we expect high levels of performance of the people that used to be our mate. Yeah. So sometimes, again, we've got to think about that sense of clarity and being present. Just be mindful, because sometimes, because you're my mate, I expect more of you.
Yeah.
So that the expectation that I have on you might be unrealistic. So but if it is a real performance issue, I think it is absolutely about just have that, set the bar, clarify the expectation, and have the conversation that needs to be had. And know that if you don't have that conversation, if you're avoiding having that conversation with the new construct, then you're not effectively leading.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's all we've got time for, Shannon, because we've literally run out of time. Please email us, info@managersandleaders.com.au, if you would like the resources that Shannon referenced and also the slides from today's webinar. We're very, very happy to share those. Please email us and ask for that, and we'll send it to you straight away. In addition to that, our foundations program, which Shannon is the facilitator here in Victoria, and we've got equally other great facilitators in Brisbane and Sydney running them. They kick off in the new year on the 12th of February in Brisbane, 12th in Sydney, and the 5th. So short break for you, Shannon.
It is.
Not too long on the beach.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no worries.
We'll get you back. We'll get you back.
I'll have a nice tan. I'll be cooking with gas. So again, thank you for everyone who's again shared their time with us and sent the questions. We had a few technical issues today, so I hope that wasn't too much of an interruption for you. If you've so we've moved into our wonderful new venue, so
we'll get it better. We'll get it better next time.
So again, we hope that none of that was too much of an interruption for you. But thank you.
Can I just thank Shannon Cooper for his time today? No, terrific effort, Shannon.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
And thank you again for joining us.
Have a wonderful Christmas if we don't see you. Thank you.